Welcome back to The Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources, we do the research, and we unpack the stories you need to know. And today, we are diving into a really eccentric, very loud, and incredibly hairy piece of 1970s animation history. We're talking about Captain Caveman.
Oh, absolutely. Captain Caveman.
Exactly. And our mission today is to look at a paradox. We want to unpack his rise and, more importantly, the structural limitations of a character who premiered back in 1977.
Right.
Because everyone knows him. He's so recognizable. But, unlike his peers at Hanna-Barbera, your Scooby-Doos, your Flintstones, he never really got that big multi-generational franchise status.
No, he never did.
We want to understand why. Why is he sort of eternally the supporting player?
It's a fantastic case study, really. For anyone who's into character design or, media analysis, Captain Caveman is he's pure distilled absurdity.
He's a wild, club-wielding guy thawed from a block of ice.
And that really reflects the experimental spirit of late 70s animation. I mean, the studio was in this transitional phase, just throwing everything at the wall to see what might stick for Saturday mornings.
And the core of his whole identity, it's right there in the sources from the get-go. That huge, shaggy silhouette, the booming battle cry.
And the club. You can't forget the impossible bottomless gadget club.
That is the character. Okay, so let's unpack this a little. Let's put ourselves back in 1977. Hanna-Barbera is hunting for their next big hit. What were they aiming for that made them cook up this chaotic, prehistoric superhero?
Well, it feels like a mashup because it absolutely was a mashup.
Right.
The late 70s were a creative crunch time for the studio. They'd mastered the Scooby-Doo formula, the 14s, the van, the villain in a mask.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. But they knew they had to evolve it, so they pushed hard for genre blending just to keep things fresh. Captain Caveman didn't just appear out of nowhere. He was, engineered.
So what were the ingredients?
You had the superhero parody, which was everywhere at the time.
Of course.
But they delivered it with this really raw, Stone Age slapstick. Then they bolted that onto the framework they knew worked, the Scooby-Doo style mystery.
And then there's that other layer, the one that really dates it in a fascinating way.
The Charlie's Angels influence. Absolutely crucial for the whole tone.
That is so key. They weren't just a gang, they were the teen angels, Dee Dee, Brenda, and Taffy. So it creates this messy, kind of unique identity for the show. It's part detective show, part slapstick comedy.
And part fashion show. Weirdly enough, it had to hit all these different notes at the same time. But let's focus on the man himself for a second. The design.
The giant, shaggy profile, that gravelly voice.
He was an instant hit. I mean, just perfect for the medium of animation.
So here's the question then. What made that design both a huge commercial win right out of the gate, and at the same time, the biggest handcuff on his potential to ever really anchor a franchise?
What's so interesting, and this is something you should really take note of, is that his success is rooted in how simple he is. But that simplicity, well, it creates some major constraints.
Okay.
On the one hand, the design is just brilliant. It's highly marketable, super easy to animate with these big, broad movements, which is a huge deal when you're churning out TV animation on a deadline.
Of course.
And he's instantly memorable in a crowd. I mean, those are huge pluses for a Saturday morning cartoon.
But the sources we looked at, they paint a really clear picture of the limitations of that design.
They really do. That same shaggy mass of hair that makes him so iconic also means he has almost no facial expression. And that just guts his emotional range. He can show angry or confused in these huge physical ways, but that's about it. You can't write a subtle, character-driven story when your lead is basically a furry brick.
And what about the gimmick itself, the whole prehistoric thing?
That's another constraint. The comedy completely depends on him being a caveman in the modern world.
Right, the juxtaposition. Yeah.
Exactly. So the minute the teen angels take a case that's, in the wilderness or some remote setting, half the comedy just vanishes. He needs cars and telephone poles to smash into.
So if you're trying to build any kind of meaningful character growth, which you need for a franchise to last, you run right into this core problem the sources all point to. Captain Caveman is built for punchlines, not for pathos.
You said it perfectly. He's a two-dimensional comedic explosion, not a three-dimensional character who can develop over time. He exists to disrupt and smash.
So you just can't build any long-term narrative tension or, emotional investment around a character whose main job is just chaotic interruption.
None. The cost of making him so instantly funny was basically limiting his dramatic potential to zero.
Okay, so if the design itself is a major constraint, let's talk about the show's format. because the sources make it clear the teen angels were actually carrying all the narrative weight.
Oh, completely.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. The whole structure relied on Dee Dee, Brenda, and Taffy being the investigative backbone. They were the logical half of the Scooby-Doo gang, essentially.
That structural imbalance is the show's Achilles heel. The angels were doing all the heavy lifting, the logic, the social interactions, the clue finding, and, the emotional core of the series.
They were the ones talking to witnesses, putting a plan together.
Right. And they each had a distinct role, probably more from Charlie's Angels than from Scooby, really. Dee Dee was the smart leader, Brenda was the kind of jumpy one, and Taffy was the one who was always more focused on glamour. They had personalities.
And Captain Caveman's role in all this?
He was the force multiplier, brute strength, a quick escape by flying, and just total chaos.
Yeah.
In pretty much every episode, he feels less like the protagonist and more like a tool.
A tool the angels use.
An unpredictable tool, but yes, a narrative grenade they pull the pin on when the mystery needs some smashing.
But hold on. Lots of successful cartoons have characters who are just there for comic relief. Isn't that just standard for Saturday mornings? Why did this dynamic specifically hurt his franchise potential when, I don't know, Shaggy and Scooby never really had to grow up either?
That's a really sharp question. And the difference, I think, is centrality.
Mm-hmm.
Shaggy and Scooby, for all their antics, are still integral team members. They stumble upon clues, often driven by their own cowardice, but they are part of the group.
They participate in the mystery.
Exactly. Captain Caveman, on the other hand, he's an anomaly that's sort of imposed on the group. He's ancient. His relationship with the angels never changes. It's static.
So he's summoned, he bursts in, solves the problem with chaos, and then he's playing her.
What?
Put back on standby.
Pretty much. He's a comedic device, not a personality that really interacts and evolves with the team.
And that means his role just gets incredibly repetitive.
Yeah.
The formula plays out week after week, which has to lead to creative stagnation.
Oh, it's a rigid formula.
Mystery pops up. Angels investigate. CC gets called in. His powers misfire. Clues lead to the bad guy. Cavey saves the day, often by accident, and the villain gets unmasked.
You could set your watch to it. And while that predictability works fine for episodic kids' TV, it turns Captain Caveman into what you might call a reset button character.
He's funny for 22 minutes, but then he resets.
He has to. He returns to the exact same state of caveman chaos, and that just erases any chance for emotional growth or, long-term storytelling.
Which brings us to the biggest writing challenge of all, and maybe the most obvious structural limit. His powers are all over the place.
All over the place is an understatement.
I mean, super strength, flight, a gadget club, and then these random one-off powers that only show up when the script needs them to. It sounds less like a character feature and more like a writer's get-out-of-jail-free card.
That is exactly what it is. And that intentional inconsistency is, it's both the main engine for the comedy and the absolute death of any real narrative tension.
How so?
Well, the comedy comes from that unpredictability. You're waiting to see what ridiculous, useless, or completely inappropriate tool he's going to pull from his club next. It's pure slapstick.
Kids loved it.
Of course, it's peak absurdity. But the curse is just as clear. When a character has this bottomless well of solutions, how can you ever build meaningful stakes?
You can't. If he can pull a shrinking ray or a giant spring-loaded boxing glove out of his club at any moment, you can never actually put him in real danger.
The tension is gone instantly. When the solution is always just one random gadget away, you lose any real investment in the outcome.
Yeah, we also have to talk about how that kind of humor ages.
Right. This style of humor, it's all about rapid-fire physical gags and over-the-top reactions. It's very tied to that early Hanna-Barbera look and, the 1970s in general.
It's spectacle, not substance. And that type of humor just doesn't carry a franchise the same way that comedy built on sharp dialogue or character relationships does.
Think about the difference between Captain Caveman and, say, a character like Bugs Bunny. Bugs' humor comes from his wit, his cleverness, his dialogue. Caveman's humor comes from how fast he's moving and how loud he's yelling. One is timeless, the other is very much of its time.
If you try to give Captain Caveman clever dialogue, he just stops being Captain Caveman.
You break the character completely.
So where does this leave his legacy? We've laid out his design strengths and his pretty significant structural flaws. He's an icon, but he never got that big reboot like the Flintstones or another reinvention of Scooby-Doo. Why not?
Because his legacy isn't really a story that can keep unfolding. It's more of a time capsule.
A time capsule. I like that.
He survives almost entirely through nostalgic references, cameos in shows like Harvey Birdman or being the wild card in a Scooby-Doo crossover movie.
So he's beloved, but not foundational.
Exactly. He works best as an accent, a quick 3-minute burst of chaotic energy, not as the centerpiece of a modern, serialized story.
So why is it so hard to modernize him? I mean, they can update Fred Flintstone every decade, but not Captain Caveman.
Because his entire identity is just too tightly woven into that specific 1970s slapstick aesthetic. To modernize him, you'd have to give him character depth. And the second you do that, you sacrifice his entire essence, which is just pure, unstructured chaos.
It's a paradox.
It is. If you give him a sophisticated, high-tech club, you lose the absurdity of him pulling a toaster out of a rock. If you give him a complex emotional backstory, you lose that primal simplicity that made him a hit in the first place.
He's perfect as he is, which means he's also completely unadaptable.
That's it.
And yet he endures. We all remember him so vividly. If he's so structurally flawed for a reboot, why is he still such a potent cult favorite all these decades later?
Because he embodies that sheer wild creativity and just the joy of absurdity that really define those classic Saturday morning cartoons.
He's pure cartoon energy.
Unfiltered. He's a reminder that sometimes, animation doesn't need to teach a moral lesson or build a complex world. Sometimes it just needs a guy yelling, "Captain Caveman!" and flying through a brick wall.
He's unforgettable because he's just unapologetically silly.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the end of our dive. We've really established, I think, the 3 key limitations that make him so iconic but also so unadaptable. A gimmick-driven design, a formulaic structure that pushes him into a supporting role, and powers that are so inconsistent they kill any real tension.
And his story really proves that sometimes the characters who stick with us the most are the ones who just refuse to take themselves seriously. They just embrace absurdity.
Yeah.
He's a chaotic, lovable, and wildly imaginative creation that worked precisely because he was so simple.
So we'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. Captain Caveman is eternally recognizable, but he's also structurally static.
So what other iconic, non-rebooted characters in animation share that same fate? The ones we love to see in a cameo, the ones who embody a specific cultural moment so perfectly that even trying to change them feels, well, like a fool's errand. We encourage you to think about that and maybe find your own next deep dive.